Good morning, good afternoon, everybody. Greetings from London. Beautiful day here today. Coming off of a long holiday weekend. I hope everybody's fresh. Thank you so much for starting your week with us. We really appreciate it. Today, we're going to do a little deep dive into the Finger Lakes, and I am joined by none other than my friend Fred Merwarth from Herman J. Weimer Vineyard and Standing Stone. He needs no introduction. Well, a little introduction. Yeah, just really before we get started, just a quick kind of personal note. I've said a couple of times throughout these webinars that the New York is kind of the lens through which I see the rest of the wine world. And that's particularly because of kind of very formative experiences early on visiting the Finger Lakes for the first time and the first time kind of doing a more serious wine trip. And to be even more specific, this kind of light bulb moment for me happened at Herman J. Weimer Vineyard. And so that was over 10 years ago now. And so really nice kind of full circle moment to be here with you all today and to be joined by Fred. So thanks, Fred. I really appreciate it. It is always a pleasure to see you.
Great to see you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Listen, I was there and it was the first time where I had wine in the glass, and I was speaking with Fred, with Oscar and yourself, and I see the lakes and you smell the air and you look at it just all kind of came together for me in a really holistic way. And I think the Finger Lakes is kind of a great region for that. It is, its terroir is so specific, and really with the kind of stunning visuals that the region provides, I think it's a great place to learn about wine. And for me, I kind of understood Finger Lakes Rieslings, New York Rieslings before I understood German Rieslings, and so it really is kind of the lens through which I kind of explore the rest. And it's been a great ride. So yeah, kudos. Let's share our little screen here and we will get going. There we go. And we'll throw that in. Fantastic. So just a quick look at the state map as we do for just a bit of a sense check. You have the Finger Lakes. You are about 5-hour drive from New York City, give or take. A fun road trip that I've made countless numbers of times. And I remember speaking with Oscar from Herman J. Weimer kind of very early on, and he was like, "Oh yeah, I went to New York City, I did a tasting, and then I drove back." And I was like, "You're gonna lose money on gas alone." I was like, "How is that practical, man?" And so I was down in New York City, and Herman J. Weimer was the first winery to let me pour wine and talk about Finger Lakes wine in New York City, and it really why I'm here today. So you are pretty much center of the state. We're working with a continental climate. The bodies of water that you're seeing there are 11 glacial carved lakes, but we should not underestimate the importance of Lake Ontario to the north as well. And so 11 long, thin finger-like lakes run parallel north to south in the northwest corner of New York State. We are closer to Canada than we are New York City. It is said that a giant dragged its fingernails down the mountain. It was a glacier. So for the Great Lakes to the north, the Hudson River, and well, honestly, really the rest of the topography of New York State down to the south. And so moving right along. Here's a little up close shot for our Finger Lakes region. We have the 3 AVAs found in the Finger Lakes. The large green area is the general Finger Lakes AVA covering the territory of all 11 lakes. And then we have sub AVAs for Seneca Lake and Cayuga Lake. Very broadly speaking, we've got native hybrids and Vitis vinifera growing, plantings of the latter, vinifera particularly on the rise. Over 400 farms and about 11,000 acres under vine. That was a 2011 number from the USDA report, and so I'm sure we've grown since then. Average growing season, we've got around 195 days. We'll talk a little bit more about those degree growing days as we move on. And again, it's kind of a region that at this point doesn't need much of an introduction. Over the past 2 decades, the Finger Lakes have become known as one of the finest cool climate wine growing regions, especially for Riesling in North America and beyond. And so, yeah, kind of fantastic spot. Let's actually stick here for a minute. In the middle, you're going to find Seneca Lake. That is the largest of the Finger Lakes. It's 61 kilometers long, 3 kilometers wide. I'm not going to be able to do that conversion math in my head, but I think in kilometers here. We've got 118 meters deep. It's very deep, so deep it practically never freezes over in winter, which is an amazing feat for being this far north. So deep that the United States Navy tests sonar equipment here. That depth has a profound effect on the conditions in the surrounding areas. We call that the lake effect, moderating the temperatures in the summer on the surrounding shores. Doesn't get as cold as in winter or as hot in summer. This unlocks the key for Vitis vinifera production because those winters do get cold, where you have frost and trunk damage is a real concern, and we'll certainly talk a bit about that today as well. Okay. So glacial scouring and high pressure subglacial meltwaters formed a series of gorges, waterfalls, and proglacial lakes. This image is from the Watkins Glen Gorge Trail State Park at the base of Seneca Lake. Phenomenal place. It is always something that I recommend to folks that are visiting for the first time, or the second time, or the third time. You should always make time to hike the gorge. It's epic, and it's really what I think about and what I want to kind of project out there is as a visual of Finger Lakes terroir, right? We've got some pretty cool geological structures kind of throughout, where we've got diverse soils and really good for viticulture. They're composed of shale, siltstone, sandstone, and some limestone. Vineyards of varying degrees of slope and drainage, and that's going to play a big factor there. I think drainage is probably one of the most special parts of this region. And so moving right along, here is kind of a cutout cross-section of the lakes. You can kind of understand how deep we're talking with Seneca Lake and Cayuga as well. And again, proximity of the Great Lakes, Ontario to the North Finger Lakes determines that level of moderating effect for varying vineyards. And so, yeah, largely, again, you're going to find schists, which is young slate. These are like those fizzle layers. You see it in the image of the gorge trail. Just really great for vine roots to wriggle deep into. And yeah. So again, based on your vineyard location, again, soils can be well to moderately well drained, vigorous to moderately vigorous. Trellis systems and row orientation have been implemented in response to slope, aspect, soil vigor. The underlying shale beds provide those pathways for vine roots and also enable water from springs to travel along. Vineyard location circumstances can dictate otherwise, but in general, for Finger Lakes latitude, north to south row orientation is considered optimal for the region. North to south orientation provides morning sun exposure on the east side of the trellis and afternoon sun on the west. But actually, I think this is an interesting opportunity to bring you in, because you guys, if I recall, have done some plantings opposite of that, where you've gone east-west, right? What was kind of your thinking there?
Yeah, I think if I take a page out of Herman's book, we tend to do things a lot of times in the opposite way of others. But the row orientation, as you said, it has traditionally been north-south, running parallel to the slopes, which from a sun orientation makes sense. From water management doesn't make sense. And if you're in steeper hillside regions, I was in the Mosul last summer, everything is running up in the slope, even when the Mosul's been set up differently because of hundreds of years of experience in knowing where to plant and how to plant. But even when what they've done is they've run on angles on slopes to capture the optimal morning, afternoon sun. And so I think that's what we have tried to do here in some of our newer plantings. We did a planting in 2004 that was true east-west. And so if your east-west is running at your screen here, we were getting basically morning sun here and then afternoon sun on the other side. So the south side of the vineyards, south facing, we're getting tremendous amount of heat. So the viticulture has to change to adapt to that. But the water management worked within the vineyard worked much better in terms of allowing runoff to run off, allowing water to soak in when needed, cover cropping, all of our soil work fit that type of viticulture. So in learning from that, our more recent plantings, 2017 on, have all been on an angle to that. So if this is, again, if I'm looking at you, this is true east-west. You guys are the lake out in front of me. We've turned our vineyards then on an angle. So we capture morning sun, we capture afternoon, but we also get runoff of water or capturing of water where needed. And I think a couple other vineyards have done that same thing. Just to work with
Hillock and Hobbs
hillsides.
came to mind, right?
Yes.
Hillock and Hobbs doing very steep east-west orientation. There. And I think, again, this is going to kind of really start to come into play as these newer plantings kind of come into their own, where we can really focus on the site-specific nature of the region's vineyards. I think the potential for single vineyards, microsites, digging into that site specificity is going to be just really exciting for the region.
Yeah, I had two other quick points just to.
Please.
The region, on the national, international radar is very recent. It's, I think, very new. People think it's a new region. It's actually, relative to North America, it's a very old region, with grapes being grown as early as the mid-1850s. And my son did a report last fall on history of grape growing in our county here. And I think there are more cows than people, I think, in this county. So it is a fairly small county, but it does get the west side of Seneca Lake and the east side of Keuka. There was more acreage planted in our county of vines, and that was hybrid and native, prior to 1920 than there are today. The number is actually really close, but almost more acreage planted prior to 1920 in our county than in the entire Finger Lakes today, wow, which is a striking number. Just as we have experience as a region, prior to me coming into here, Herman and people even prior to that, a lot of big production moved to the West Coast, where it was just easier to grow, easier to farm. But as Dan mentioned, that number is continuing to increase, the number of plantings in the Finger Lakes. The other thing is, from your map of showing the Finger Lakes as it compares to New York State and perfect. There's a great solar satellite image of this shot from 2015, the polar vortex, where we had in February, I think we had like one day over 10 degrees Fahrenheit. It was a very, very cold month.
I got it on the next slide if you want to.
You do. I will not show your cards.
No, it's my fault. You should have gotten all this in advance, and I didn't do it. We're there. We are.
There it is. There it is. So
go for it.
Yeah. So you can see Seneca, as Dan mentioned before, Seneca and Cayuga are almost the only areas that are not frozen in. There's actually even a better shot of this where all the Great Lakes are frozen. So there is no blue. There's only gray and white, except these two blue streaks in the middle of New York. And we have known this growing here, living here. People prior to us, people after us will know this, that the only reason we can grow vinifera in this region is because of those two lakes and because they don't freeze. So if that changes in the future, which we don't know whether it will, that might change our ability here. But that is why we can grow Riesling and Chardonnay and Merlot and Cabernet Sauvignon, Saperavi. So
great. And so, as it says, it is a cool climate. Yes, it's defined by our cold winters, not necessarily the growing season itself, which the growing season itself is quite productive. Hot, humid summers for sure. I think, we've got continental temperatures, but again, that moderation by Lake Ontario to the north, Erie to the west. We're bringing in extreme winter air from Arctic high pressure systems. That's warmed while passing over the warmer waters of these Great Lakes, provides a degree of warming. We'll take it. During summer, you've got a degree of cooling provided. And again, as you said, increasing the viability of our Vitis vinifera grapes. In general, the region accumulates its heat units later and faster than more traditional old world regions. So kind of once we get over the hump, which I think was last week, it's pretty fast and furious from there on out. It's a compact season. And really the key to that, a warm and dry September and October, during harvest, that's just really important for extending hang time as kind of as long as we can into November. We are seeing increasing degree growing days. The seasonal 10-year rolling average has risen over 12% over the last 40 years, from 2.4 thousand in 1982 to 2.7 thousand in 2020. And so we are seeing changes, right? And so I think that might be a bit broad in the sense of things are getting warmer, but as we see, things are getting just more extreme. This past winter was quite mild, all things considered. I was up in the region the first week of April. That Sunday was 30 degrees Celsius. I found it very cold. And then the following weekend, when, of course, right after I had left, got into the 80s. I believe it was 82 degrees. And so crazy. Then we had this really lovely April, which kind of accelerated our bud break and all that kind of thing. And then May 18th happened. And Fred, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about that event and kind of how it played out for you guys?
Yeah, so we had a widespread, intense frost experience on the 18th, region-wide, statewide, actually. And normally for us, we consider May 15th as that last day of potential frost. That's when we even set our calendars for planting our nursery stock around the 15th. So we have a commercial nursery growing grapevines for other wineries and vineyards around the country. You put those baby grafts out in the field, and it just takes even the closest temperatures below 32 to zap them. And so we're very careful about putting our nursery out too early. So we wait till after the 15th. Thankfully, we waited until after the 18th. But the region experienced its worst frost in well over 40 years last week and a week and a half ago. Varying degrees of from 100% crop loss to almost nothing. We have vineyards on 5 different sites, and we're still trying to figure out what some of the factors were. It was a southerly wind, which is kind of unusual for this time of year. So in some cases, it feels like it took away the lake's effect on vineyards that are close to it, at least on the west side. Vineyards higher up in elevation seem to do pretty well, which is very unusual.
Yeah, it seems almost counterintuitive. Yeah.
It is. Yeah, everybody's kind of scratching their heads a little bit. And so, to your point, Dan, our changing climate, we're seeing that we've always had cold experiences in winter where we have minus 24, minus 25 C. Those have been our limiting factor for evolving and growing vinifera at a faster pace. Because if you lose your crop of Riesling, it takes a while. It takes you don't have fruit that year. It takes another year to get the vines back to full production. So you're really out 2 years before you get back to full production. Those are traumatic experiences that growers and wineries have had here for decades, and we know about that. We don't see that changing. Winter of 2021, we had minus 26.5 here, which is really, really cold. And that is the breaking point of even the most tolerant vinifera like Riesling and Saperavi. So those experiences haven't changed. The fact that we're having mild winters, like this past winter, we had no snow at all. I think we had 2 days where we saw any type of accumulation. That is,
it was late too. It had to be March. I mean,
yeah. And the snow before it was before Christmas.
Right.
So that is, we typically don't get a lot of snow here on the Finger Lakes because of how moderating the lakes are, but we had absolutely no snow cover. Our ponds didn't freeze here, so my kids were really upset that they couldn't go ice skating. Those are all things that, you know, we find like, oh, we didn't get to ice skate, but like that is a sign that things are changing. And then this late frost, once again, is another tell that something's just not right. We had bud break. Unfortunately, this year we had bud break almost 2.5 weeks earlier than.
And so it was kind of that 1-2 punch, really. You know, I think generally speaking, you know, I don't when I talk about this kind of stuff, I don't usually highlight those late frosts, because usually just our bud break is so delayed where you know, there's only a couple of weeks where it's like, you know, really, really kind of nail biting. And I think it just, our window got blown open by the mild winter this year. And so
I documented the Chardonnay, our Chardonnay here. I documented that last year bud break on the 8th of May. I could have even said probably a week later because things were so cool. This week it was, this year was the 13th of April. Which is, it's a big shift. So
danger zone. Well, I don't want to go too kind of gloom and doom, but you know, because I've been putting this out there a lot. You know, it's not if you could make it there, you could make it anywhere. It's if you could make it here, then you should, right? Because you know, the results when you get it right are you know, again, terroir driven, world-class cool climate viticulture. You know, the results, I think the wines speak for themselves. And so I think challenges for sure. I when I speak to winemakers like yourself, and I do all these interviews and things, I get a lot of like, yeah, the vintage variation is, you know, makes you want to pull your hair out, but it's also what gets you out of bed in the morning. And so I think it's important to say it's not like we landed in this spot and said, screw it, we're going to do viticulture anyway. I think it's we're recognizing the potential of this place and fighting the good fight. So very quickly, because we've got still a good clip of info to go through, but primary kind of viticulture techniques that we are using to combat our cold winter temperatures. And so I know there's a few things I'll kind of let you share.
First and foremost, what has evolved out of viticulture in the 50s and 60s has been a technique called hilling up and hilling down, where we go through with plows and mound soil up on the graft union. That is to protect the graft union from these intense cold periods. It's also a way to delay your shoot production off the bottom in case you have a late frost. So there's a number of reasons to do that. Most vineyards in the Finger Lakes still do that as a form of insulating your graft union. You might see that technique a little bit in Champagne. You might see it in parts of Germany. You know, a lot of places are a little bit too warm now, but Ontario and certainly Finger Lakes have employed that. We have wind machines where you know, to move air on those really cold nights in winter. We also use them for frost protection. And then, you know, generally speaking,
about like kind of like spare parts and you know, and how we're how do you guys work that where you're kind of with your pruning? Are you leaving extra canes on for kind of down the line as an insurance policy? Are you growing additional trunks, things like that?
Yes, great question. So if you look at our vineyards in April, they will look very different from classically grown vineyards where you have a single trunk coming up out of your graft union, things that are nicely tied, maybe a single cane going a single direction, slightly bent, and if you're in some of the Mosel vineyards. For us, we are typically carrying 2 or 3 trunks. That's as a safety in case one of the trunks is damaged and collapses. So you may see a vineyard with 3 trunks coming out of the same plant. At that time in April, we are tying 2 to 3 canes, either flat or bowed, and then we're always carrying a cane or 2 straight up. And that is our, hey, once we see bud break, we can make an adjustment. Maybe this cane didn't bud out as well. We also use that as our kind of frost protection in those early weeks of May. In case you have a frost is going to damage down to up. And so typically those buds that are way up in your trellis won't be hit. And so that gives us a little bit of flexibility to adjust the crop and the growing potential for that year. Ultimately, at some point, we go through and either tie that down or cut it off, and then it looks like a normally trellised vineyard. But we still have those 2 or 3 trunks that we're carrying year round.
Yep, great. Then on the flip side, let's see, I got married in the Finger Lakes on Keuka Lake on August 21 in 2016, and that was a 98-degree day. You look at those the photos of me from the ceremony on through the end of the night, and I just get wetter as it goes on. My clothes become more disheveled, and it was a hot day. And so we have these hot, humid summers. What are we doing in the vineyards on that end?
Yeah, a lot of that is we typically have really nice breezes here. That's a kind of a staple of this region. We also have supplying good airflow, air drainage. In those really hot, dry, which, you know, we're sort of not sure whether that's going to be our future or whether it's more moisture. It sounds kind of counterintuitive compared to, you know, what the culture that's happening in California. But for those experiences, so last summer was a fairly warm and dry August. We are removing any cover crop. We start every other row, take out any green material on the vineyard floor. If we get into very extreme seasons, we will remove every row of cover crop so that there's no competition for moisture. It also, by creating that layer of very dry, kind of crusty soil, you create an insulation to the moisture that's hanging out below. And so that's been a technique that we've kind of evolved into over the last 25 years to help maintain moisture in those kind of sensitive mid to late August periods where the vine just needs a little bit more moisture. That's kind of the main element to it. We've backed down
on the mildew end of things, when we do have kind of wetter you know, years with higher humidity. You guys don't do any fungicides, is that right?
No, we do fungicides, but
I'm sorry, right? You don't do pesticides or herbicides,
right?
Yeah, I'll let you.
Yeah. So fungicides is the overall for controlling mildews. Pesticides is the overall word for anything that controls anything, right? So on our fungicides, we're maintaining with sulfur, some low levels of copper sulfate, and biologicals, which that's a whole new kind of avenue that we're going down. We also have 33 acres that are now Demeter certified biodynamic. So that's all teas that we're creating here. We're continuing to add acreage to that biodynamic program. So we're at about 45 acres that are farmed biodynamically. In those warm seasons, dry seasons, you know, we're pretty good. Like most regions in years like 21 and 18, you know, your canopy management is really important. getting the fruit exposed, sunlight into your fruit. Typically, we're not doing a lot of leaf pulling. We back down a lot from that, as we've seen the results in Cabernet Franc and Riesling from that. So you can always pull leaves, you can't put them back, as we kind of jokingly say. So we're very cautious about leaf pulling and overexposing fruit. Yeah, in years like 21, which was an extremely wet, cool August, September, it does become very tricky here. It can. Now, you said before, I sound like I'm complaining just a little bit. I think any region, I don't think we're special in that. I think every region, every wine region has their challenges, and ours are just different. Our viticulture has evolved to work around them, just like if you're in Napa or in Champagne or the Mosel. So everybody has their challenges, and especially with climate, it's just we're gonna have to get better at what we do, I guess.
Well, I think a lot of the language that floats around is, it's so hard to do it here in New York. And I'm like, ask somebody in Burgundy. They're not having,
They're
it's
right.
not easy,
Exactly.
ask
That's
somebody in California, like there's issues, and
There's
so
issues. Yeah.
I think everybody's, like I said, fighting that good fight. In the interest of time, I'm going to go blindingly fast through our history section. You made that excellent point kind of earlier. And this is also information that was covered in our kind of broader New York module last month. And so, again, first vines planted in the Finger Lakes region around 1829. The majority of the next 70 years, native and hybrid grapes taking center stage. 1860 comes around. We have the Pleasant Valley Wine Company getting U.S. bonded winery #1 in Hammondsport. And around that time, about 1860, we've got over 3,000 acres of vines, grapes being grown along the shorelines of Cayuga, Canandaigua, and Seneca Lakes. Industry expansion continues, over 50 wineries across 20,000 acres of vineyards by the early 1900s, and then Prohibition. And so it was a big reset for the entire American wine industry. The Finger Lakes, no exception. But again, this is where a lot of the wine of the times was being produced. Pleasant Valley Wine Company, winning gold medals in Vienna in 1863 for sparkling Catawba. This is inspiring growth, and we're seeing, you saw a lot of New York champagne around that time. And so first commercial vinifera vines are coming later in 1960, Pinot Noir, Chardonnay, and Riesling. We've got here Dr. Constantine Frank with Charles Fournier in our image, and first vintage for Dr. Frank Vinifera Wine Cellars, 1962. Lucas Vineyards in 1974, the first winery on Cayuga Lake, and in 1977, Glenora, first winery on Seneca Lake, and Herman would have followed very shortly thereafter, right?
Yeah, Herman actually started planting in 1974 on this site. Gold Seal was a major sparkling producer on Cayuga Lake. They started planting at ours. We'll taste the Standing Stone Saperavi. They started planting on that site in 1972, and those Chardonnay and Riesling vineyards are still in production. So,
yeah. And yeah, I think the Farm Winery Act in the 1970s definitely ushers in this kind of new influx of smaller producers, growers turning into vintners. And it's really established what we have as our industry today. And I'll make the point again later on to say, there are no massive bulk players really in New York State as compared to the West Coast. And so that is a real value point for New York State wine, particularly in the Finger Lakes. And so, we are, there's a lot of cool stuff going on. Who's that handsome fella? Just a couple of headlines. JamesSuckling.com. Most important, they highlight the bold open-mindedness of winemakers who are unafraid to move beyond the status quo. Those that are planting new grapes, grafting old techniques to new technologies, and applying new understanding of their terroirs, and the results are delicious. New York Times, New York does not nearly get the respect it deserves. And then special shout out to you, recognized as Wine Enthusiasts Wine Star Awards 2021 International Winemaker of the Year, which I believe is the first for any East Coast vintner. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. Awesome. Okay.
I thought I was wearing the same shirt there for a second. I was
You
like, it's not.
This is just way out of order. We talked about this. Fantastic. And again, I think, what the results seem to be, or at least the commentary in the media is the best grape growers are making the best wines. It happens in the vineyard, and I think that's our kind of, our key to kind of going forward and having continued success. And so we're going to get into our wine flight now. First one here, we are doing the Constantin Frank Riesling Natur, the 2019. This is a Method Champenoise sparkling wine made from 100% Riesling. There we go. Oh, and it's still spilled all over the place. That's fine. Okay. Sparkling wine is in the Finger Lakes has really kind of jumped forward in prominence recently, and it's something that we've been doing for a long time, and I think this is also an important note to remind that kind of throwback to the late 1800s and kind of even our kind of reemergence right after Prohibition. Most of what was coming out of the Finger Lakes was sparkling wine, one way or another. And so you've got folks like Constantin Frank and Herman Weimer that have been pioneering sparkling wines in the region since the early 80s. Really, it was actually I believe it was Willie Frank that started Chateau Frank really with their purpose of sparkling wines, and these grapes, this Riesling vineyard where we're getting our Riesling Natur was actually planted with the intent of traditional method sparkling wine. And so you've got some real kind of forward thinking there. Fred, tell me a little bit about kind of Herman's journey with sparkling wines and kind of where it brought you guys today.
Yeah, so his first sparkling was actually 1983. It was a time when he had about 20 acres of Riesling planted here. Riesling was not very easy to sell. To be honest, he was having a hard time selling Riesling. He was selling and making Chardonnays and Pinots. He was Gewürztraminer, but Riesling was a difficult sell for him. So he started making sparkling from it. By the late 80s, Riesling had really changed. He started making dry styles of Riesling, and that really changed his evolution in the region. And I think having a dry style of Riesling here in the Finger Lakes really set us on a course to where we are today. Shortly after doing the sparkling Riesling, he did traditional method from Chardonnay and Pinot Noir in 1984, 1985. And there's author Schoonmaker, German American, but writing about German wines, called The Wines of Germany, first published, I think, in 1951. He writes about all the different regions in Germany and then talks about German sparkling and basically says the Germans know how to make sparkling, but they are terrible at growing it. And so, that was his overall comment. It was a page and a half worth of talking about sparkling wines. And, I've always thought about that, having worked with Herman, made sparkling with Herman, and we were making sparkling in off vintages. So a cool wet year, Herman's like, oh, it's a great year to make sparkling. A warm, ripe, powerful year, not a chance of making sparkling those years. And so you'd see our production here for 20 years just oscillate with mediocre vintages or poor vintages, lots of sparkling production, good vintages, nothing. As consumers, as the wine shops and wine by the glass programs, as soon as you run out, that you're done. As a producer, we've worked very hard to get that placement, and then we say, oh, we won't have another cuvee for another 3 years. Sorry, no one's waiting for us in that regard. So, when Oscar, our business partner, and I took over in 2007, we had been making fairly high volume or good volumes of sparkling every 4 years. And we said we have to change that because we can do it. We can make great sparkling every vintage. And so in terms of having consistent production, we are doing vintage cuvées, but just like Dr. Frank here, there's not a lot of non-vintage in the region, but I think the region has realized that we can do it every single vintage, and that to maintain and to grow the market, you have to keep working at it. It's also from a technique standpoint, you have to stay up with it. You have to remember what you did. You have to practice. It's like a sport. You just have to practice it constantly to get better at it. And I think that's where the region is right now. Is there's a lot of small production sparklings, some bigger, producers like Lenora, Dr. Frank, us, who are really going after it. We're doing 3 plantings last year, this year, and next year just for sparkling production.
Cool.
And I think that's a really good indication of where the region is going.
Mm-hmm. Yep. My last visit to Ravines with Morton Halgren and Lisa, they're also really ramping up bubble production, which is exciting. Their wines are also some favorites. And I think I don't know if I just wasn't paying attention. I feel like the sparkling Rieslings are more popular now than, let's say, maybe 10 years ago.
Yes, they for sure.
Yeah.
I can say almost anything with bubbles now is very, but Riesling has been such high demand that people just haven't had the ability to put things down, to not have them available for sale within 6 to 8 months. And so it takes a conscious effort of I'm dedicating this block to something that I'm not going to realize for 2 to 3 years if you're doing traditional method. Now, like I said, anything with bubbles at the moment from New York is selling very well. So, people are turning around Cremant style tank ferments really quickly. And so that changes the model and that changes the economics quite a bit. We've only done traditional methods, so that is a big calculation for us. When I took over from Herman, we had about 3,500 bottles in tirage, and now we've got 85,000 bottles in tirage, and that's just kind of, our interest in doing this in our, maybe hopefully seeing what the region's going to be able to do.
Yep. This is a lovely wine. The mousse texture on the bubbles is really expressive. It coats your whole palate. It is distinctly Riesling, and I think it ticks all the boxes. This wine, 2019 vintage, was disgorged in August of 22, and I think they believe they're aiming for around 20 months of time on the lees in the bottle. And then there is no dosage in this wine. We're ending up with 0.8% residual sugar. Very good. Moving right along. We got incredibly lucky. This wine was stuck in customs for several days, and about 15 minutes before this webinar, it showed up at my door. So I'm glad I get to share it with you all today. I actually got a pretty good temp on it too, which is good. And we've got the silver thread. This is a Riesling single vineyard from the Doyle Fournier vineyard. And I wanted to show this one again. I think that the kind of site specificity and these single vineyard expressions are a really kind of wonderful way to keep pushing forward and exploring our terroir and showing more diversity within our kind of production beyond your house style flagship dry Riesling. And so this is a vineyard that was planted in 1973 by Charles Fournier. It's kind of one of who we mentioned briefly earlier, but kind of a founding father of our modern industry. Farmed by the Doyle family, kind of prolific grape growers in the region. And this is my first time trying this wine. I'm looking forward to it. really kind of bright fruit coming through. You know, a lot of times here in the UK, I'm often asked, you know, what is the Riesling style of the Finger Lakes? And it's incredibly diverse. But I always think that fruit and the fruit profile is probably the hallmark where, you know, when we start to dig into more of those single site bottlings, you'll find winemakers that recognize, you know, soil and terroir of a specific site, and they really want to showcase that. The ravines, Argot Singer always comes to mind as an incredibly mineral driven style. First thing for me on this is just really friendly, attractive fruit, nice bit of floral, tropical. And I do believe we are coming in. Yep, they've got our International Riesling Foundation scale on the back. I don't know if you guys will be able to see that, but coming in at medium dry. And I'm looking at 4 grams per liter, so 4% residual sugar on this wine. Fred, where can we take Riesling next? Where do you kind of are you in agreement with me? Like, you know, we just kind of keep digging deeper and getting more kind of fine tuned, or you know, what's in your purview over the next 10 years for Finger Lakes Riesling? Where are we going?
Oh, Dan, were you sitting on a meeting we had last week about this
No
with
kidding.
Oscar and Dylan and my wife Marisa? And you know, it's interesting because we were kind of part of the leading out of single vineyard Rieslings 18 years ago. We have our 3 big blocks, Standing Stone included now, so a 4th big block of Riesling that we showcase as a single vineyard. We went very, you know, naturally very Germanic in them in terms of showing, you know, a Trocken style or dry style, late harvest Auslese styles from these different vineyard sites to show the depth of Riesling. So then where do you exactly, what is that next progression of, we're thinking some of the winemaking techniques of skin ferments, longer lees contact. Morton at Ravines has been doing foeder, large oak vat ferments. We brought our first foeder in a year and a half ago, and so we have HAW biodynamic Riesling in that now, and that is an angle that, you know, we explore on every single vintage certain aspects of our production. Riesling is now in the forefront, even though we've done all of this work and we bottle 15, 16 different bottlings of Riesling. There is, what is that next step up? So we're thinking that it is in the winemaking. Yeah, it's a, we have pushed a lot of different buttons to get to where we are in terms of, you know, our whole production spontaneous ferments. That was a huge movement for us over the last 20 years. And I feel like our whole purpose in that is to reflect the sense of place the best that we possibly can. Now it's introducing a little of these tweaks in the winemaking to showcase some of the different aspects of Riesling that I can do in the cellar. Yep. So yeah, I don't know if I answered it, but
no, that's good. I don't want you to
figure.
Yeah, well, I don't want you to tip your whole hand either. We gotta, you know, you gotta keep us, you know, waiting for more.
You know, one thing we did do, and I sat with Ernie Lozen and did a seminar with him 5 years ago, and from Lozen Brothers in the Mosel, and we tasted a Riesling that was on lees for 3 years in barrel, and so, you know, not to copy that, but to see what our Riesling would do. We've done 2 now. We just released in 2017, bottled, and the exact same blend put back into barrel with lees. And to compare those 2 is just fascinating. It really is. It's the 17 bottled a year past vintage, tastes like a fresh, powerful Riesling. The one that was in cask, it's hard to pick it out as Riesling. It really is. Yeah.
You start to
So
lose that varietal typicity. Yeah.
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 So yeah,
Yeah.
we'll
I mean,
see.
I think, go ahead.
No, I say, well, we'll see. We'll see what's in the pipeline.
Yeah. I think, I think about my travels kind of around Europe, Germany, Alsace, Austria, a lot of the things that we're talking about, these guys are doing, with the lees, with the large foudres. I mean, I think I'm trying to think of someone that wasn't using large foudres for their Riesling production on my most recent Mosel visit. And I think, I think, it is a selling point for the Finger Lakes, for New York State. We're closer to Europe than the West Coast, both physically and kind of maybe spiritually. And so I just had one other question. I got my notes for the Fournier vineyard here. They note it's a banana belt vineyard. And the banana belt is a very colloquial term that gets thrown around. Can you just tell everybody where specifically the banana belt is in the Finger Lakes?
Yeah, so if you look on the map that you have up here, the Silver Thread wine,
Yep.
Sanka is right down the middle. Watkins Glen is at the bottom of the lake. If you go up the east side of the lake, up about 30 miles, that is, so right at the elbow.
Yep.
Up there, that is kind of considered the banana belt. Now
I'm using my mouse cursor, but I have actually no concept if you guys can see it or not. But
yes, yeah, we can see it.
okay.
Yeah, and it has kind of shown itself to be some of the riper fruit in the Finger Lakes. But that work of where is ripe, we are way far behind. Like, if you think of how Burgundy expresses itself in terms of Village, Premier Cru, Grand Cru, a lot of that has done around consistent vintage exposure of ripeness. There's also a lot of other factors. That's over hundreds of years of data collection. We're talking 20 to 30 years maximum here, where people are really seriously looking at one site versus another site. And so the Fournier site, the Doyle Fournier site, was planted at the upper end of the banana belt, 1973. Our Standing Stone site was planted in 1972 by Fournier with some Chardonnay for sparkling production. And it's interesting, when you're that close to the lake, you actually get some cooling effects. So the ripeness isn't really the defining character of these vineyards so much as when you move up the hill a little bit. Now, owning Standing Stone for 6 vintages and maintaining our Yosef and Magdalena, which is on the west side, the upper west side of Sanka Lake, we felt that was the ripest site in the Finger Lakes. And I still hold that to be true, comparing one Riesling block to another Riesling block in terms of sugar accumulation. Now, that's not the only thing that we should be looking at for sure. That's an old mark of quality. But I think some of the quote unquote ripest sites in the Finger Lakes might not even have been discovered yet. I think that is the real. So, but in general, that lower east side of the lake has shown itself to be riper than traditional sites on Keuka or traditional southwest sites on Sanka.
Cool. We're going to press on. I'm looking at the time, and I've failed our wonderful attendees. I hope you don't mind us going a few minutes over. That's what happens when you get me talking with Fred. Okay, so we have the Anthony Road Cabernet Franc, vintage 2020. Bottle right here. This wine, the Anthony Road, is producer on the west side of Seneca Lake, maybe a 10-minute drive north of you guys. At Herman J. Wonderful vineyard winemakers, Peter Beecraft, wonderful fella. We've got 2020 vintage, great vintage for red wines. And I think just all the reds have been outstanding from that vintage. We got 13.6% alcohol, which sits, pretty solid for us. But again, nice warm vintage for it. This wine spends 16 months in French oak. And I love it. I love that nose. It's It's fresh, it's snappy. You've got some really lovely red fruit characteristics there, but there's also a very distinctive varietal note for Cab Franc there. There's a bit of kind of a graphite minerality, a bit of maybe cedar, and then just that touch of pepper on there, which I'm sure is going to carry through the palate. I'm a personal fan of that kind of capsicum note and that kind of varietal typicity. I don't like a kind of whitewashed Cab Franc where it just kind of tastes like red fruit. It kind of defeats the purpose of using this grape. And I think these guys have done a nice job. Yeah, nice wine, nice texture. I could definitely see that as my barbecue wine for sure. Actually just bought a grill this weekend, very exciting. And yeah, for Cabernet Franc, I think we're seeing another kind of a resurgence here. I think it's a grape that has followed similar trends to Riesling in terms of popularity. I think we're just seeing it more and more as a single vineyard variety, whereas kind of traditionally, other than the Loire Valley, it's usually a bit player as a blending grape. I think here in the Finger Lakes, it definitely showcases itself to be the star. I also think that it is a grape variety that does a great job of uniting the major regions in New York State through the Hudson Valley and Long Island, all being able to vinify and produce premium Cabernet Franc. And I'm sure there are people that could argue with me on that one, but that's my opinion. I think it's a great grape for us. It could also be done in many different styles too. And so this one, again, utilizing some French oak, mostly older French oak, but also our stainless steel Cabernet Francs are incredibly popular. And it's also kind of another wonderful one for rosé. And so, we talk about that vintage variation, but, between sparkling wine and rosé production, we've really got, if you're smart and you could pivot and you can plan ahead and, and all that kind of stuff, there are styles that even kind of poor weather events can lean into and showcase some really great wine. Yeah. Any thoughts on Cab Franc, Frank?
Yeah, I think we have gone all in on Cab Franc also, working with it since 2001, 2002 was our first release of it. Herman and I, single barrel, just really excited about what we were tasting. The region in the last 5 years has probably doubled its Cabernet Franc production in the last 5 years, with growers really recognizing the need for red fruit, red grapes, but also the quality that is coming out. So 2020 is a very good vintage for us, ripe, powerful. You can taste that in the bottle here. But even in those off vintages that we considered off vintages, cooler vintages, 1921, we're seeing ripeness, typicity of fruit, expression of sense of place, which kind of is, sits with us as a region where, yeah, they're lighter wines compared to, say, 2020, but that's okay. And the market's okay with that.
It's a grape that really doesn't need power and strength to be really attractive.
Right.
I think it's a winner for sure.
Yeah.
Cool. I want to give you some time for presenting our last wine, and then I will lightning round a few other points to close. But over to you with the Standing Stone Terroir Barrel Select Saperavi. We did the kind of New York broad session, then we did Riesling, Cab Franc, Sparkling, Hybrid Natives. And so when we move now into our regional kind of focuses, starting with the Finger Lakes today, I tried to pick slightly different wines, again, showcasing Riesling where we're looking at single vineyards, the sparkling Riesling. And then I wanted to show some different grape varieties as well. And so Saperavi, I think, is a really interesting one for the region. I think it's becoming more in the mainstream. And so over to you.
All right. Yeah, so this is from Standing Stone Vineyards. Standing Stone, as a site, was started to be planted with vinifera in 1972 by Charles Fournier and Guy Devaux. It was for sparkling production, the Riesling and the Chardonnay. Ironically, neither of those productions ever made sparkling until we took over the site in 2018. There was a couple, Tom and Marty Masinski, who purchased the site in 1987, revamped some of the vineyards, left the old vineyards intact, but started revamping and experimenting with new varietals. The one that they put in, which has outlasted almost everything else, has been Saperavi. First planting was 1996. Certainly Saperavi was planted in the region before that. Dr. Frank, McGregor vineyards and winery on both on Keuka Lake. But they noticed consistency of production, quality of fruit, hang time, durability for winter, for generally for rot or mildews in the growing season. And so that is a tell for us that a varietal should be planted more. It took them a while to do that. They started planting more Saperavi in 2009, and they planted basically a half acre every vintage, 9, 10, 11, 12, so on. We took over the site in 2017. It was a fairly small production at that time, maximum 200 cases of Saperavi. And we were looking at the potential for really a lot of fruit. So we started to think of other ways to use Saperavi. We have now bottled rosé, sparkling rosé, fortified, and then also the traditional red presentation here. Within the red production, again, kind of going down the path I was talking about, how we've worked Riesling, how we've worked sparklings. We're committed to the varietal, but then trying to figure out the nuance of it as you pick it, as you select it on the press pad, and then as you ferment and barrel down or not barrel down. So this has gone through the same methodology as our Cabernet Franc with stainless steel versus wood production, fermentation, pump over versus punch down, whole cluster versus crush and destem, and a whole slew of iterations of those to kind of where this wine is now, where this is 30% whole cluster. This was fully in older Hungarian oak, which is pretty traditional for us. And the other part of this, the non-barrel select, was fully stainless steel. And so looking back on the 2020 stainless steel version, which versus the barrel, we are starting to actually tend towards the stainless steel, or even we have it in a sandstone jar on the 2022 vintage to explore those as more traditional vessels for fermenting and for storage versus even wood. But this wine is from the 2020 vintage, ripe, powerful vintage. Like I said, 30% whole cluster. Saperavi inherently doesn't have a lot of tannins. The acid tends to be very high, which is why we thought about it for sparkling. But the acid can be a challenge to work with. So it almost has to go through malolactic, bring that acid within something that is pleasant. So this is full malolactic, 30% whole cluster, bring in some tannins to it, give it some texture. Yeah, I like where the wine is. Again, we're reflecting on what we've liked about it being in barrel and what we haven't.
Because you do another cuvee with it as well that's red, but you're doing different aging, yeah? Yes, yeah. Now, actually in our cellar, there's no Saperavi in barrel. It's all in stainless steel or in sandstone. Yep. So, but we do have 7.5 acres of this planted, which is one of the largest plantings outside of the country of Georgia. It's an interesting variety. I mentioned that it's very, I think I've mentioned it, that was disease tolerant, that it made its way through the season really nicely. But there is a moment, and it happens around the 13th, 14th of October, every vintage, where
they're very heavy clusters. They're big berries, very loose clusters, which is part of its advantage. But as soon as it starts drooping, it gets botrytis. And so at that moment, it has to come off. There is no ends if, you have to take it off. And so that was something that Tom and Marty warned me about. And I think 2018, I'm like, no, you know, look how durable, look how thick those skins are. Yeah. You know, this is indestructible. And then, yeah, you have to take it off or else it will rot.
Yeah, so. I think the balance on it's lovely. I mean, definite acidity where, you know, you're left fresh. I actually think the tannin and grip on it's nice. It actually looks like it has a place, it has some direction to go in terms of those tannins even softening over time. And I actually thought that would be an interesting moment. I've actually had the pleasure of experiencing some aged Finger Lakes wines with you. It's probably the majority of my experience with kind of back vintage Finger Lakes, and we've gone back into the 80s, which is just, it's always a good time. You know, do you think that folks should be sitting on their wines longer and really starting to see where these wines can go?
I think so. There were times here in the Finger Lakes where everyone was just selling their wine as fast as they could with no reflection. Even us here, even Herman, with no reflection of what the wines would be like a year down the road. Not that the winemaking styles weren't setting the wines up for aging, but just, you know, basic business stuff of cash flow and sizes of cellar and, you know, things like that. But I think the last 5 years, we're in a very different place. I think people are thinking not only in their winemaking, but also then in the construction of their build outs of wineries of like, hey, I need to set aside places to age wine, whether it's in barrel stainless steel or whether it's in the bottle. I think
if there was ever a better variety to do it with, it's Riesling. I mean, those
sure.
wines, you know, they just run on and on and on. It's been some of my kind of, you know, old wine experiences for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Anything else you want to add on for our Saperavi before I kind of tie us up?
No, I think I hit on all the points. Thank you. Yeah.
Good. Yeah, no, my pleasure. So ladies and gentlemen, if I could, this would be 4 times the size, this flight. We could be talking about Chardonnay with unoaked and stainless steel fermented expressions, just really showing our cool climate fruit. We could be talking about textural Pinot Gris and perfumed Gewürztraminers, Rosé, huge category, Cabernet Franc, Pinot Noir, Blaufränkisch, Saperavi. Pinot Noir as a red wine also remains a contender and is passionately supported by many dedicated producers. And if it wasn't coming off of hybrids and natives just a week ago, I might have included them because you know, we've got evolution in our vineyard and cellar techniques. We are prompting a movement towards quality hybrid viticulture and winemaking. And so Vignoles, Céval, Marshall Foch, Baco Noir, natives, Catawba. I mean, we could go on and on. There really is something for everybody. And so again, sustainability, you know, there's more New York State wine coming out of the Finger Lakes than any other region, and sustainability is just you know, it's what's going to define and preserve our future, solidify the place in the world of wine. And we've got some really wonderful dedicated sustainability warriors, Herman J. Weimer and Standing Stone, one of them. And so yeah, fantastic. The program by the New York Wine and Grape Foundation should be definitely explored if you haven't had time with it yet. The core tenets are important. And then last but not least, you know, always end with the value proposition. You know, our Finger Lakes wines, they offer incredible value. We've got that wide breadth of styles, varieties with our world-class cool climate signature, fresh and lively wines, moderate alcohol, lots of flavor. We didn't even touch on food pairings with these, but man, Finger Lakes wines and food are just, there's so much to play with. Really, really cool. Budget friendly to the average consumer, especially compared to some of our West Coast counterparts. And with the overwhelming majority of producers being small and family owned, you're getting this artisan product that is rooted in unique and fascinating terroir. Fred, I had one more kind of last question for you. What other regions would you recommend that folks explore for bettering their understanding and context of Finger Lakes wines on the global stage? Because you guys are great. We did a blind tasting night when on my last visit, and I don't think we poured any Finger Lakes. I think I was the only one that poured Finger Lakes wine, and only because I was there and I had to buy the wine there. And so you guys are really kind of big proponents of exploring the world of wine. And so I thought that would be a fun question to end on.
Yeah. What are we drinking? What are we tasting?
So should you try Georgian Saperavi in order to better understand Finger Lakes Saperavi?
No, actually, I mean, the wines are, but no, the wines are really interesting and fascinating. Dylan, who's making wine with me, he and his wife just came back from Georgia 2 weeks ago, and they said the wines that we're making are nowhere in the same sphere. And part of it is the plant material, is that the plant material that we're working with and the majority of the Georgian material is just very different plant materials. So, let's see. I always taste Pfalz and Rheinhessen for some of our more powerful Rieslings. Not again, not to think we're better than we are, but just as we have some riper sites that you have to think about how to work with the acid and the structure. And so I always enjoy tasting Pfalz. I think for Cabernet Franc, obviously, as you mentioned, the easy place is Loire. We're riper than Loire, but I think viticulturally we've changed a little bit so that we've ripened out our pyrazines, which maybe it's something that we should reconsider. We're rethinking that and reevaluating our leaf pulling and such. We grow great Gewürztraminers. We've always looked at Northern Italy for inspiration for that, not Alsace.
Yeah, that's smart.
And then sparkling, I actually do look a little bit to Alsace for sparkling. And we taste a lot of, so yeah, maybe that's just a brush stroke of what
that's great. No, that's great. That's great.
So.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I don't see any questions in our chat or Q&A, and so I'm going to tie it up because we've gone over. But if you do have questions for Fred or myself, please don't hesitate to reach out through the Wine and Grape Foundation, and we'll tackle those for sure. And so with that, I'm going to leave you. Thank you for spending a little extra time with us, Fred. Thank you for spending a little extra time. I know you're a busy guy, and I cannot wait to drink some wine with you again, my friend.
Likewise, thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much. Thanks to the New York Wine and Grape Foundation for this webinar series. Once again, we will see you next week. I believe I'm in the Hudson Valley. Thanks so much.
Thank you.